Good morning, Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, now, of course, this week our discussions are so heavily focused on the national budget because it affects all of our lives, and we are continuing that this morning. So this morning we are being joined by Mr. Anslem Richards, who is the technical advisor in the Office of the Chief Secretary of the Division of Finance, Trade, and the Economy. And of course, he's also an economist within our space. So, special good morning and welcome to you, Mr. Richards. How are you?
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks for having me. Welcome to Tobago, wherever you are, wherever in the world you are. So we are here this morning. It's a rainy morning.
It's a rainy morning, but it's all good.
Yes,
we need the rain. So.
Plenty of that.
All right. So now we had an allocation. I mean, the numbers are $2.585 billion. But when you look at the breakdown, there's quite a lot of concerns coming from the THE because we have, out of that figure, we have $260 million for developmental expenditure. So I just want to get your thoughts on just the overall allocation.
Well, I think that the overall allocation is really a disservice to the people of Tobago. As a matter of fact, I classify it as a declaration of economic war on Tobago and Tobagonians. You cannot consciously and with any dignity and decency allocate $260 million to do all the development work in Tobago for entire fiscal year. And when you look at the budget, they are proposing to spend $6.2 billion for development work, capital development work throughout the country. And you only allocated $260 million for all of Tobago. There are some projects in Trinidad, 1 and 2 projects surpass that $260 million. And the minister himself, in the budget presentation, alluded to the fact and the importance of capital development expenditure as a stimulant for the economy and the creation of employment. And if he is aware of that, why is it that he's shortchanging Tobago on the development end of the budget? And that is where we need to have some capital investment in the island to really change the economic and demographics of the island. We need to diversify the island. We need to expand and create new sectors that will, bolster the tourism sector. We need to invest significantly in agriculture, education, and health. If you look at the reality of the situation and look at our health outcomes in Tobago because of the structure of the national economy and where the investments are going, Tobagonians have lower health outcomes than Trinidad. If we need certain healthcare opportunities, we have to travel to Trinidad to have access to those things. The same applies with education. If you look at education, when you finish A levels in Tobago, you have to leave Tobago to go to the tertiary level. So those things are reality. And if they are not affording us the opportunity to make the investment to change those reality, then we have to push the envelope when it comes to our autonomy.
Now, what happens now that we asked for a lot larger figure, and I remember
1.151
right
billion.
For developmental funding, which of course these is very short change in what we want to do. How are we now going to take $260 million and make it do what one point something billion dollars was supposed to do?
Well, we have to go back to the spreadsheet, the drawing board as it were, and we have to do some calibration. We have to do some prioritizing. We have to ensure that whatever we use the $260 million for creates a kind of spending efficiency and spend impact for the people of Tobago. So we may not be able to do the suite of projects that we are proposed to do, but out of that we have to choose those that have the greatest impact on the lives and the transformative impact on the lives of Tobagonians. That's the reality. And the sad part about all of this, and Tobagonians need to understand that, is that the THA doesn't have the luxury of off-budget financing for these opportunities. The minister mentioned that he will be borrowing $700 million for the Housing Authority.
And that was going to be one of my questions.
That is off budget.
Yes.
So when you add that to the $6.2 billion that they have, so that takes you to $6.8 billion. So that is increasing. And if you go to the revenue numbers, the minister said the budget deficit is $5.1 billion. But when you go to the revenue number, he's proposing to borrow $13 billion. And these are the things the average public would not understand what they are doing. So he is setting up the game to borrow $13 billion plus, and the budget deficit is only 5 point something. So it means therefore he has access to $8 billion in addition, should he need it, through borrowing, which the THA doesn't have.
In the discussions that the THA would have had with the minister in leading up to the budget, was there any conversation about borrowing capabilities in this fiscal year?
Well, the THA borrowing capability has been hamstringed by one, the debt liability that we have inherited, because we have to manage the debt profile. When you borrow, you have to pay back. So we have the $600 plus million owed to contractors, and we are not getting the kind of support from Port of Spain to pay that debt down. And as I said before, even if the PNM had returned to office, there's no way you can liquidate that debt on an allocation of $260 million. So what the central government have said to contractors in Tobago who are owed by the THA, that for fiscal 2024, you will not be paid. Because the THA, if you have $260 million to do all your new works and your ongoing works, would you take that to pay contractors that you inherited a liability for? That doesn't make any political strategic sense from where I sit. But that's another concern, and that's a decision for the Chief Secretary and the Executive Council. But what they are saying, because last year, if you recall, we have been having the conversation with them about assistance for the payment of the debt. And in the media review, they offered $100 million. And we have submitted the documentation to support the claims. So they offer $100 million in fiscal 2023. But in fiscal 2024, you cut the development program, when you compare to last year, by $140 million, 35%. So what you are saying to the people of Tobago, clear and simple, is that you cannot do 35% of the work you were able to do last year. But we have to understand how this thing is being programmed. This is not by accident, you know. You have to understand that fiscal 2024 is the year of political delivery, because we're going into a 2025 general election and then a 2026 THA election. So what they are doing, they are placing a knee in the financial throat of this administration. So you can't breathe, you can't do anything. Because whether we want to like it or not, the two Tobago seats are critical for the current administration to retain power in Port of Spain. So what they are doing, they are sucking out the economic energy out of this administration so that the population will get tired and weary. They can't get this done, they can't do that, and they can't do that, and hoping that that will turn out in a victory for them in fiscal in 2025. But Tobagonian has to be made aware of what the plans of the central government is, because it is unfair and unreasonable for the central government to weaponize the budgetary process against the people of Tobago. And if you listen to the conduct of the minister and the delivery of the budget, you are the Minister of Finance for Trinidad and Tobago, regardless of the political climate or what is happening between the THA and the central government. You cannot stand up you should not stand up in the national parliament in the presentation of the country's work plan and say to the nation and the world that you wish them luck. What is that? You wish them luck, and you will advise. The document belongs to you. Even if the THA submits its policy agenda for fiscal 2024, you don't have to come and separate yourself from it and say you will advise. You are the Minister of Finance for Trinidad and Tobago. You determine what happens in the Minister of Finance determine what happens in Tobago economically, not even the Chief Secretary, because he said take your $260 million and cool it.
Now, I want to talk about that debt that we have a little bit more. How much is the actual debt owed to contractors at this point in time? Because I know that there were some payments made.
Right. So the verification and recalibration process is ongoing. What we are able to do, we were able, based on the documentation we received from the contractors, we were able to verify claims of 398, just around $400 million. What has happened is that the forensic process and exercise coming out from that, a lot of contractors came forward and said that there are works that they were not, they were awarded and they were not paid, they were not done, that were on the books for payment. So that in itself wiped off a couple hundreds of millions of dollars from the debt profile. So that process is ongoing. So we have a liability spreadsheet that is showing at this particular point in time about $400 million. That is ongoing. That figure can change as we go along because it's a very fluid process. And in the public service, there's a requirement by law and regulation that every invoice is to be paid by public funds should be verified and certified that the work was done or the service was received. So that's the process that is ongoing.
So we at this point in time we are owing on the books $400 million.
Yeah, but that is ongoing. So we're still verifying the process.
Certainly. And we only got $260 million for development funding, out of which some of that has to go to contractors.
Well, the contractors are owned under the development works, and definitely how the government system is set up and the charts of account, you have to pay under the line item, which will be development works and so forth. And definitely there is a regulation in the public service that says the previous year's debt has the first call on current year's allocation. What that is really saying is that you should pay your debt first before you do anything new. I don't know if that is what Colin Imbert and them is trying to force the assembly to do, but I know the chief secretary is a very wise young man, and I will like to think that he is very, very sensitive of these strategies and will respond appropriately in the circumstances.
Are you in a position to tell me how much percentage of THA's development funding was spent on paying debt over the last 2 fiscal years?
Well, I can't give you that figure at hand, because what happened is we have been paying where we make saving, we were paying the debts. So I can't give you a ballpark figure.
Okay.
But we have been working, and it is a very tight rope. You know, when you have $300 million and $260 million for development work, there's very little air in that jar for you to pay any other outstanding liability, because the demands are so high. If you recall, at the end of 2022, there was significant infrastructural damage on the road infrastructure and the retaining systems around the island. Those works are still outstanding. Badrak is to be fixed. The road, the Bloody Bay Road, the Castara Road, there is some arrangement there or some requirement for the acquisition of land. And there's a host of other small land slippage across the island that we need to pay attention to. And $260 million definitely cannot provide the fiscal requirement to treat with the developmental needs of the island. If you are saying that we are not generating enough revenue in Tobago, and let us take that as an argument, therefore, you, the central government, given the setup of the country, this colonial setup that Port of Spain will determine whatever you do in Tobago, because that is what it is, and you want Tobago to be more self-sufficient. It means, therefore, the central government has to come to the place and recognize that for the transformation of the Tobago economy to take place, there has to be a sustained capital investment program over a period of time, worked out between the central government and the THA and the people of Tobago. If that does not happen, we will continue to have this conversation when all of us are long gone.
And so now looking ahead, so we have that $260 million, and we have a whole list of things that need to get done in Tobago, a whole lot of roads, as you mentioned, need to get fixed. How are we going to start to tackle that? I mean, we heard that the minister wished us luck on our all the plans that were outlined in June.
What he really said to Tobago, let me see all you're going to survive with $260 million. But that is what the luck story is about, because if you look at the conduct of the minister in this year's presentation compares to last year's presentation, you see the ocean that has, been created between that. And whether we like it or not, and whether we want to say, whether persons will say you want to politicize the thing, this is clearly, and it is an inescapable conclusion that this is clearly a reaction to the current political climate or exchanges between the THA and the central government. There's nothing to convince me otherwise. It is clearly a reaction to that, because I am taken aback at the conduct of the minister, and we have a prime minister, a sitting prime minister who is a Tobagonian, and I cannot understand why a prime minister who is a Tobagonian will sit in a cabinet and allow this kind of atrocity to be perpetrated against the people of Tobago. My expectation is, or my outlook is, I want to see how the prime minister and the 2 members of parliament for Tobago East and West will stand up in the national parliament and defend this budget in the interest of the people of Tobago. Yes. I hear the minority leader is talking about significant increase of $64 million. $64 million, you know what the money is provided for? The money is provided to pay arrears on the 4% for the teachers, $44 million out of that. And then the remaining is to continue the increased salary payment for the rest of fiscal 2024. That is an increase. That is a liability expense that was owed by the central government to workers in Tobago. And he's talking about $64 million increase. And they don't go into the document and understand what the money is there for. We have not enjoyed any increase in this thing. As a matter of fact, we have lost $140 million on the development side of the equation between fiscal 2023 and fiscal 2024, which is really an attack against the livelihood and the progress of the people of Tobago.
So now, I mean, moving ahead, how are we going to, let's say, like when you look at some of the plans, like how are we going to prioritize what roads need to be fixed first of all? Because I know I mean, we're always complaining every day. There's so many roads that are in trouble that need immediate repairs. There are those that were destroyed with the passage of the weather patterns last year and so on.
Definitely.
How are we going to begin to start to treat with those issues? And not just those issues, but we have a whole lot more things in different parts that need to be taken care of.
Well, definitely. It will be a continuously balancing or a continuous dance, if you want to use that as a terminology. But what you need to do in exercises like these, what you do, you look at the frequency of the use of the roadway, where it is leading to the villages that are there, the economic installations that are there. So you look to maximize those kinds of investments so that if these roads that become more efficient, it impacts the economic activities there. It impacts the livelihood of the people. So that is the kind of things that are going to inform the equation as to how you select the roads and the infrastructure to be immediately. Also to the physical threat that it poses to commuters is a significant thing. Because you wouldn't want, for instance, Barak is one of the main thoroughfares. There is some physical thing happening there. You wouldn't want to leave that hanging there unattended to, and then you have a greater slippage that takes the life of commuters. So therefore, those are the kinds of considerations that will inform the prioritizing of the infrastructure that needs to be done. And then the other critical factor in the equation is the strategic direction in which the administration determines the island needs to go into. So because you have to put the investment there so that the whole island can move in that direction, because it's spending that will move us in that direction. Because as the Prime Minister would have, loudly shout to the world that we don't have legislative authority, so we can't command people behavior through laws. We have to influence people's behavior on the island in terms of our economic transformation through where we are doing the spending and the efficiency of our spending.
Now, when we look also forward to trying to figure out what it's in my thoughts here, but trying to figure what are the that we will be making with that money. Are there any projects that we're looking at that will be bringing in revenue that we are going to be putting some emphasis on?
Well, that will be a matter for the Executive Council to speak to, the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Finance. But definitely, revenue generating projects and will be a priority, because we need to increase our revenue flows. So that will be a focus for this administration. The Study Park Quarry is an item on the agenda. We need to do more there in terms of the capacity for production and all of that, because we are targeting export, so that may receive some attention. But I think the overall matrix for that is a matter for the Chief Secretary and the Executive Council to decide on.
And what was the investment needed for the Study Park Quarry, the amount of investment to bring the equipment up to a certain standard for us to even at least start supplying the local markets on a greater way?
From our budget this year, the numbers for the Study Park Quarry was, I think we had asked for, based on what was submitted by the company there, Spell, I think they were asking for $60 million, $60 million to do the upgrades, to the acquisition of a new crushing plant, and to do the physical upgrades and the acquisition of some other quarry equipment to support the operation of the quarry. So they were asking for an investment of $60 million in that regard. So if you carve that out of the 200,
you just left with 200.
You're left with nothing. As a matter of fact, $200 million to do development work throughout this island. And you see, we have to take it into context too, that historically, the island development has been significantly underfunded. So we are not at that place where you can now. So let us just look at it this way. let us say, if over the last 20 years, the central government was doing the kind of investment that was required to grow and transform the economy, we might have been at a place now where Tobago is now uptaking more revenue. Our physical infrastructure and the economy infrastructure is well developed, and therefore the requirement of investment from Port of Spain would have been declining over time because the economy is growing, it is expanding, it is transforming. So then, there's an inverse relationship between the investment requirement and what is happening in the physical development and transformation of the economy. We are not there yet. We're still at the infancy stage. The economy is still grappling with the impact of COVID-19, especially in the tourism sector. We are still climbing out of that black hole, if you want to call it that. And therefore, there is a need for a recognition that the Tobago economy has to have a sustained capital development investment program for about 10 years as a minimum, targeting key infrastructural requirement for the development and transformation of the island economy. That is something that needs to be worked out. Whether it's $500 million a year for the next 10 years, which will give us $2 billion in investment, we need to work out the logistics of that. We need to have that agreed to. But more importantly, we can't sit in Tobago and allow Tobago's fate, economic and fiscal fate, to be determined by the milk of human kindness of whoever sits as the Minister of Finance. That is a no-no. We have to push this agenda for the completion of the Autonomy project, where the law requires, whether it's 5.5%, which is the mean of the DRC at this particular point in time, 5.5% of the national budget comes to Tobago. No public servants in Trinidad should be walking between 4.03% and 6.9% and say give them 4.3. By law, I think we come to the place now, based on what has happened over the last 20 years, that the law must say 5.5% or 7% as a minimum. The minister has no choice because that is the law. I think we are at the place now too that the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Finance must give serious consideration to trigger the DRC again. I think the time has come for that to happen because there's nothing for us to lose. We are already being fed at the lower end of the DRC. If we go back to the DRC and they say, well, they're still within the 4.03%, that is what the reality is today. But given 20 years of evolution and development and the changing factors that inform that, the growth in the island population, I am certain that the minimum that the DRC ruling going forward is nothing less than 6.9%.
Now, what about making a case to the minister about presenting a plan that if you give us this amount over the next 5 years or so, these are the investments that will be made with that money, and this is the revenue that's expected. And then when we start getting that revenue, then we don't exactly need this great total coming from the central bank because we would be self-sustaining ourselves.
Well, this is an annual work plan of that very conversation. If you go through here, so when we said we wanted $1.151 billion, it's to do exactly that, right? And that is what the annual budget statement said. It said these are the things that we propose to do, and these are the transformative impact it's going to have on the economy. If you listen, and I'm not putting any winning the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance sale this morning, but if you listen to the budget presentation in terms of the narrative that was presented in the House of Assembly in June, compared to what was presented in the Parliament for over 4 hours, you recognize that the central government have lost its way in the development of the island. I think Colin Imbert and those persons and the Prime Minister have been around too long. I think we need some new ideas and some new faces in the National Parliament. So probably the time has come for us to look at how long persons stay in the National Parliament. We talk about 40 years and 30-something years, and we are still struggling with basic issues of crime, security, education, health, infrastructure. And and billions or trillions of dollars have passed through this country from oil bonanzas and oil prices and all of that,
yes.
And we are still struggling with these basic issues. It means, therefore, we have a serious crisis in leadership. And I think a lot of persons in the Parliament, including on the opposition side of the bench, have overstayed their time. And it's time for the population to say, you have been wrong long enough. Turn off the light. The game is over, on some of those persons who are in Parliament. So I think we are at that place. And definitely there is need for some serious rethinking. I think the Constitution, as a matter of fact, I have come to the place that I think we need to have a new project, a national project. And I take this from one of my sons. I think we need a project that speaks to a new nation. A new nation. A new nation, and it starts with the social contract, the Constitution, that needs to be rethink. It has not worked. It is a colonial piece of legislation. It's a Westminster system of government that mimics the colonial arrangement that existed before. It has not served us well. It is not serving us well, and it is foolhardy for us to go forward with it. And that's why the first project in the New Nation project is the internal self-government project that needs to be completed.
Certainly, and well, I mean, while that remains a while off, we are still left to grapple with the current realities of the situation. And when you look at what was presented in the budget in terms of, um, the minister said something interesting in like when he spoke about Caribbean Airlines and the Sea Bridge and so on, where he said that the government continues to make the investments to expand CAL, to expand its fleet, to expand its routes and whatnot, and provide sufficient on the air bridge. He says that there's every day there are a continuous number of empty seats, whether it's on the planes or on the ferries. And this continues to be a problem for Tobago in the sense that when we look at growing our tourism products, when you talk to the business community, the hoteliers and so on, access to Tobago, travel to Tobago continues to be a problem. But on from the minister side of things, when they look at just the numbers, like when they put in the empty seats and so on, they don't see it as a problem.
Okay.
So then what needs to change about the conversation that we are having with the Minister of Finance to make him a bit more aware of what needs to be done to fix that transportation for us to be able to also improve what we are generating here in Tobago in terms of revenue?
Well, so the issue here with CAL, and let us use CAL as the point for the conversation. The issue with CAL, based on what the minister was presented. So you have CAL running, and the minister is saying there are how many hundred empty seats for the period under review and all of that. What that is saying is that there's an efficiency issue in CAL. And efficiency means that these seats are being made available when they are required. And there are historical data that tells you, all of us are from Tobago and we know, that on weekends, let us say from Thursday to Tuesday, are really the high demand periods, right? But that doesn't say that you will not fly the plane from Wednesday to Thursday, right? So it's a management issue to maximize the revenue generation capability of CAL based on the demands. You may have, by the very nature of the industry, you may have to travel with a load sheet that is sometimes not efficient in terms of the number of passengers, but that is just the nature of the beast, and that's why the government steps in and do the kind of subsidization of the arrangement. But within CAL and in the greater operation of CAL, there is some deficiency in terms of efficiency in the management of the service on the average. The port is a little bit more efficient with that because their predictability. We know when the boats are leaving, 6:30. We know the capacity, so there's a better efficiency model here. CAL is a little bit more challenging given the nature of the industry, but we need to work on CAL efficiency.
But have we been having that conversation? Because there's something that gets missed. So we know here the problems that we face here in Tobago, but when Trinidad looks at the problems, they see something completely different.
Yeah.
And that's what comes forth in their messaging.
Right. So they look at it from basically the numbers. We put in on 12 flights and we're subsidizing 12 flights, so it's a number issue for them, right? While there's some efficiency in the number, but beyond the number, there's even the data that the minister presented in the parliament, there's a message behind the numbers. Because if you're saying that there's so many vacant seats on the thing, it means therefore your booking system has a problem, the timing of your flight has an issue. So all those things you have to continuously do the modeling and the simulation to see what is generating all this inefficiency in the operation of CAL. Because if CAL is saying, I put in on all the flights, Tobago is saying, I can't get a flight, then where is the disconnect? Where are the touch points? You have to make some touch point to ensure that when persons are looking for flights are likely to be available, or there's some predictability in terms of the availability of flights. So either there is some issue with the booking arrangement for CAL, or two, the flights are not being run when the demand is there. So there's a misalignment between CAL operation and the public requirement for the flights.
And Mr. Richards as well, when you look at the theme for the budget, that base for setting up the country for diversification and that sort of thing, that message is coming out from the theme. And we look at, areas for diversification such as tourism, which continues to be a conversation that has spanned many, many years. We've beaten this conversation to the ground. But have you seen any effort, like from your viewpoint, have you seen any effort from this budget that speaks to, let's consider tourism as that a diversification option?
Well, and I said it repeatedly, if the central government is interested in diversifying the economy and diversifying it in a context where you can own foreign exchange, which is really the game changer. And let me just work this out for you. So he speaks about the manufacturing sector and the growth in the manufacturing sector and the 17% now, and that's fine. But when you go into the structure and the expenditure profile of the manufacturing sector, you will see the problem you're having. They are importing most of their input into their production processes, right? So you need foreign exchange. And most of the demand for their product is local. So there's an imbalance between their foreign owning and their demand. And that is putting pressure on the forex side of the equation. If you come to tourism, tourism is exporting. People don't understand is the export. It's just that the consumers of the goods and services are coming here to consume it. But it's foreign people coming here to consume your product. So that is considered, that is classified in the accounts, in national accounting as exporting goods and services. So if you have that and you understand what the diversification strategy is, really is to optimize your foreign exchange earning, then you will see tourism, as has happened across other Caribbean countries, as a ready and available option for the diversification. And Tobago is the prime location for that to happen. But it comes back to the point I was making before. It requires the central government to invest in Tobago, which they are not prepared to do. So they will talk about the diversification strategy. They will talk about tourism. But the prime destination for the transformation of tourism and to make tourism a viable sector earning sustainable foreign forex is Tobago. But their strategy in Port of Spain is not to invest in Tobago. So they will talk about tourism and they will talk around tourism, because if you're interested, well, the $260 million, that should, the minister should have sent that alone for tourism. Say, well, let's take 260, we diversify it, fix up the tourism plan, create new opportunities and so forth. And then send another 500 million and say, well, do your work infrastructure, your schools, so that will give us $260 million. And I did that calculation just to show you what would have happened if they had given us 5.5% of the national budget. 5.5% of this $59.102 billion would have worked out to $3.2 billion. We now would have had $3.2 billion for Tobago. We could have decided, just as the minister is saying, 2.2 for, we could have decided we are going to restrict our recurrent expenditure to, let us say, a maximum of 2.5. Right? And that will treat with all the transformation within the public service and all of that. 2.5 and 700 is 32. 3.2 billion. Perfect, no argument. You say, give us the mean. It means, therefore, we would have gotten a little above 50% of what we wanted for the development program. We have asked for 1.1, we'd have got 700, which is a little bit more than half. We'd have been in a very good place, a fair place, based on what exists now in terms of the arrangement and what the convention has been and what the ruling has been. 5.5% of the national budget would have placed Tobago in a much better place. It would have afforded us an extra $700 million to do the work in Tobago. My position on this is that what they have done, and I'm arguing from the position or I'm making my thesis argument from the position of 5.5% of the national budget is the fair option. The Tobago population is now around 5.5% of the national population. And I'm saying if we do it on a per capita basis, give us 5.5%. So my argument now, the $1 billion, Tobago is paying $700 million out of the $1 billion that the minister has put aside to pay back pay. $700 million of that belongs to Tobagonian. Is our money they're taking to pay the bill in Trinidad. That is my analysis. You don't have to agree with it. That is what I'm saying to Tobagonian. They have taken your money that you were supposed to receive here and put it to pay arrears. And he's standing up and say he paying the arrears by December. But let me tell him it's Tobagonians paying the arrears because you have appropriated our money that should rightfully come to Tobago and taking it to pay the arrears. And that is the kind of conversation we have to have with Port of Spain, and we have to talk to Port of Spain in a very stern and firm manner. We are not saying that we are going to engage in disrespect and cuss out, This is the reality. This is what is fair. And we will not go weary to speak to Port of Spain across the table in a very respectful manner, but demanding what rightfully belongs to the people of Tobago.
And then in the last minute that we have, has there been any conversation on the THA level amongst you guys in regards to the impending property tax? And how will that be collected in Tobago? And how would that be used when it is collected?
Well, based on the legislation, and the minister mentioned it in the parliament, that the taxes collected for the residential property will remain with local government. I think the same arrangement is in place for Tobago. And as a matter of fact, all taxes collected in Tobago stays in Tobago, and then there's this net off effect, right? I don't know what the equation or the model will be with the new property tax arrangement and how the residential tax will be treated in terms of staying with the local government arrangement to deal with sanitation issues and school maintenance and all those issues. I guess they will go back to the same net off issue because it's a way of accounting for the entire tax pool, right? But the money will stay. In Trinidad, what happens now is that all the monies go to the consolidated fund. In the Tobago case, when we collected the tax here, they stays in the THA and at the level of the ministry and the THA. So if you allocated $2 billion and you collect $200 million in tax, you will only receive $1.8 billion from the Ministry of Finance. And you add the two tax revenue collected there, the 200 million in tax revenue, and it takes you to your parliamentary allocation. And what has happened to Kandace over the last number of years from fiscal 2017, and I think I made the point here before, and the Chief Secretary have been making the point, and he wrote to the minister on it, is that the THA was not receiving all its parliamentary allocation. As a matter of fact, as we speak, there's an outstanding amount from 2017 to last fiscal that amounts to over $154 million. Currently, the minister mentioned it, and the reason why he mentioned it is because we have been at the ministry this year to ensure that we get all our allocation. And you see, he mentioned that he gave the assurance that Tobago will get all the allocation.
Yes.
Right now, there's $19.3 million remaining that we have not yet received from the central government on the parliamentary allocation for the last fiscal that ended on the 30th of September. We are hoping that the minister and the ministry will be true to their word and that we'll receive that before the end of this week.
All right.
Or Tobagonians will know that the minister has lied and he has lied in the parliament.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it right there. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Richards, for being on with us and for having this discussion. And viewers, please have a safe and wonderful day, even though it's a bit rainy out there. So just watch out for the rain and be safe on the roads. And we'll see you again tomorrow.